The rain outside the towering glass windows of Rothwell and Finch fell in sharp, rhythmic streaks, as if the sky itself was mourning the end of a decade-long marriage. Inside the sleek, soulless conference room, Amelia Hayes sat in a stiff leather chair, her trembling hands folded neatly in her lap. The table before her was a vast expanse of polished mahogany, littered with crisp stacks of legal papers. Her eyes blurred as she stared at the bold black letters. Final dissolution agreement. Across from her sat Adrian Cole, once her husband, once the man who whispered forever into her ear. Today, he looked more like a magazine spread than a human being. His Tom Ford suit hugged his tall frame with arrogant precision, and his hair was styled to perfection, not a single strand daring to rebel. Draped around his arm like an expensive accessory was Chloe, the woman who had replaced Amelia. Chloe was everything Amelia was not, or so the world believed. Youthful, dazzling, with skin that glowed under the sterile fluorescent lights. She wore a cream cashmere sweater, tailored trousers, and heels sharp enough to slice through pride. On her wrist glittered a rose-gold Audemars Piguet watch, catching every beam of light as if it existed solely to flaunt wealth. She wasn't looking at the divorce papers. She was too busy admiring her own reflection in the watch's diamond-studded face. Adrian leaned back, smirking, his arm tightening around Chloe's shoulders. His voice was calm, but the condescension in his tone cut deeper than any blade. "Let's not drag this out, Amelia. Some of us have a 2 o'clock tea time." The words echoed in Amelia's ears, cruel reminders of how little she meant to him now. For years, she had been his anchor, his loyal partner, the one who managed their modest home, saved every penny, supported his dreams even when it meant sacrificing hers. She had been the quiet strength behind his success, the silent one applauding from the shadows while he climbed into the spotlight. And now, after all that, she was nothing more than a relic in his eyes, a burden he had discarded. Her lawyer, a weary but kind woman named Sarah, cleared her throat softly. "We're simply waiting for Miss Hayes to sign. Then this will all be finalized." Amelia's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. Her chest tightened. Beneath her heart, a secret bloomed quietly, one no one else in this room knew. She was 1 month pregnant. After years of failed treatments, tears in sterile clinics, prayers whispered into pillows, Amelia had finally conceived. It was the miracle she thought would never come, the life she had begged for. But Adrian didn't know. He had walked away before she had the chance to tell him. Chloe's laughter broke through her spiraling thoughts. High, sharp, insincere. She leaned toward Adrian, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It's really quite sad, isn't it? Some women just aren't built for the future. They get stuck in dusty books and old memories." Her manicured hand stroked Adrian's sleeve. "But don't worry, darling. With me, your future is bright." Adrian chuckled, the sound smug and hollow. He turned his gaze to Amelia, his eyes filled with pity he didn't truly feel. "Just sign it, Amy's. Go back to your manuscripts and your quiet little life. It's where you belong." Amelia's throat constricted. For a moment, her vision swam with tears, but she blinked them back, refusing to let either of them see her break. She lowered her eyes, gripping the pen harder, forcing herself to breathe. Her free hand brushed against her abdomen, a reflexive gesture, a silent promise to the tiny heartbeat growing inside her. "For you, my child. I will endure this." Her mind flickered to the nights she had spent alone, staring at negative pregnancy tests, to the hollow ache of being told she was unlikely to conceive. Adrian had once held her in those moments, whispering that it didn't matter, that they were enough for each other. But those promises had dissolved the moment a younger, shinier replacement walked into his world. Now here she was, discarded, erased. Yet within her grew the very miracle Adrian had stopped believing in. The lawyer pushed the papers closer. "Miss Hayes?" The pen felt heavier than iron. With every shaky stroke of her signature, it felt like she was carving pieces of her soul onto the page. The ink bled like wounds on parchment. Adrian leaned closer, watching her sign, satisfaction curving his lips into a predator's grin. Chloe tightened her grip on his arm, her watch glittering like a trophy. Amelia's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. She signed the final line and let the pen clatter softly onto the table. Her lawyer nodded, gathering the documents, her expression sympathetic but powerless. "It's done," Adrian announced, as if he had just closed another business deal. He pressed a kiss onto Chloe's temple. "Let's go, darling. We've got reservations at Le Jardin tonight." The sound of their laughter trailed behind them as they rose, leaving Amelia in the cold, cavernous room. She sat frozen, her body heavy, her heart shattered, her hand resting unconsciously against her womb. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky, rattling the glass. Amelia closed her eyes, her body trembling as silent tears finally escaped. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the life she had built, the dreams she had carried, the love she had believed would last forever. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a sharp, unexpected sound that broke through the storm of grief. She hesitated, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand before answering. The voice on the other end was calm, authoritative, unfamiliar. "Miss Hayes, this is Sullivan and Cromwell. We need you to come to our office immediately. It concerns an inheritance." Amelia's brows furrowed, her breath catching in her throat. An inheritance? It had to be a mistake. She had nothing. She was nothing. Her eyes flickered to the signed papers before her, still damp with ink and tears. The world had just declared her defeated, erased, forgotten. And yet, on the other end of the line, a stranger was telling her that something unimaginable, was waiting. She rose slowly from the chair, her knees weak, her heart pounding. She clutched her abdomen again, whispering silently to the fragile life inside her. "Maybe, just maybe, this isn't the end." And as the storm raged outside, Amelia had no idea that in the very moment Adrian flaunted his new wife, her life was about to transform in a way that would shatter his world forever. Amelia Hayes was not born into luxury. She came from a quiet town, tucked between rolling fields and faded barns, a place where Friday night football was the highlight of the week, and the local diner doubled as the town's heartbeat. Her childhood was simple. Sunday mornings in church, afternoons helping her mother in the kitchen, evenings curled up with books borrowed from the tiny county library. It was there, among dusty shelves and dog-eared pages, that Amelia first discovered her love for stories and history. She grew up believing in the kind of love she read about, devotion that lasted a lifetime, sacrifices made in the name of loyalty, a partner who would stand beside you through every storm. When she earned a scholarship to study archival science in the city, she carried those small-town dreams with her, like fragile heirlooms wrapped in hope. It was during her second year of graduate school that she met Adrian Cole. He was magnetic, ambitious, and dazzling in a way that made the world tilt when he walked into a room. Adrian was older, already carving out his place in the financial world, but to Amelia, he seemed like the answer to every whispered prayer. He noticed her when no one else did, asked about her passions, and made her feel as though her quiet love for history and old manuscripts mattered. Their love story began with long walks through Central Park, cheap takeout dinners on her dorm floor, and stolen kisses beneath the city lights. He brought excitement, she brought stability. Together, they balanced. At least, that's what Amelia believed. Years later, when they stood at the altar, Amelia thought she had found her forever. Her dress was modest but beautiful, her vows trembling but sincere. Adrian had whispered promises of building an empire together, of growing old side by side. She believed him. She built her world around him. But their marriage carried a shadow Amelia hadn't anticipated: infertility. For years, the couple tried. Negative test after negative test, appointment after appointment, each result cutting deeper than the last. Amelia cried silently into her pillow while Adrian turned away, claiming exhaustion from work. At first he held her, assured her they had time, but as months bled into years, patience thinned. His reassurances grew colder, shorter, edged with frustration. Amelia bore the shame alone. Every baby shower invitation that arrived in the mail felt like a cruel reminder. Every photo of friends with children left a hollow ache in her chest. She became skilled at forcing smiles, at congratulating others while her own dreams crumbled. At night, when Adrian stayed late at the office, she'd press her palm against her flat stomach and whisper prayers that went unanswered. Her devotion to him never wavered. She cooked, cleaned, supported his ambitions, kept the home running so he could climb higher. She believed, naively, that love and loyalty would be enough to tether them together. But loyalty cannot compete with greed, and love cannot survive unchecked ambition. Slowly, Adrian changed. The man who once brought her wildflowers from a street vendor began bringing excuses. His phone calls grew shorter, his nights away grew longer. He said it was business, meetings, obligations. Amelia wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the marriage she fought so hard to protect wasn't crumbling beneath her feet. The truth unveiled itself cruelly, like a blade slipped between ribs. A perfume that wasn't hers on his collar. A whisper of laughter on a voicemail not meant for her. A receipt for dinner for two at a restaurant she had never been invited to. Then came Chloe, young, radiant, effortlessly confident, the antithesis of Amelia's quiet, bookish world. When Adrian finally left, he didn't just walk away, he paraded Chloe like a prize, a shiny new trophy that validated his ego. To the world, they were glamorous. To Amelia, they were salt-in wounds that refused to close. And yet, amid this wreckage, something miraculous happened. The test turned positive. A single pink line beside another, faint but undeniable. Amelia stared at it in disbelief, her hands trembling. After years of being told her chances were slim, after countless tears and prayers, she was pregnant. Just 1 month. She pressed the test against her chest and sobbed, not from despair but from a flood of emotions she couldn't contain. Joy, relief, fear, hope. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a failure. For the first time in years, she had a reason to believe. But Adrian didn't know. He had already left. He was busy sipping champagne with Chloe, showing her off at galas, smirking for cameras, basking in a love that was shallow and performative. To him, Amelia was nothing more than a chapter he had closed. She considered telling him once, dialing his number late at night, her hand trembling as she held the phone. But then she remembered the smirk, the condescension, the way he had looked at her across the conference table, as though she were a relic. She hung up. This child would not be Adrian's salvation. This child would be Amelia's. Still, the timing was cruel. With every wave of morning sickness, every sleepless night, she had to endure the divorce proceedings. She walked into courtrooms and conference rooms with her secret nestled under her heart, carrying both despair and hope like a fragile vase she dared not drop. When Adrian and Chloe laughed in her face, Amelia clenched her jaw and endured. When Adrian's lawyers stripped away assets, Amelia lowered her eyes and endured. She endured because inside her was a reason to keep fighting, even if no one else knew it yet. On the outside, she appeared broken, defeated, a woman stripped of dignity. But in the quiet of her tiny apartment, she whispered to her unborn child, "You're my miracle. You're the proof that I'm not finished." Her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked tired, pale, worn down by heartbreak. But when she rested her palm on her stomach, she felt a flicker of strength. She had no idea what the future held. She only knew that she had to survive, for herself and for the life inside her. And as she stepped into the stormy night after signing away her marriage, Amelia thought her world had ended. She thought she had lost everything. What she didn't know was that within hours, the world would no longer see her as a discarded wife, but as the unexpected heiress to a fortune that would shake the very ground Adrian and Chloe stood on. The conference room at Rothwell and Finch was designed to intimidate. Every inch of it screamed power and money. The walls were paneled with dark oak, the table was a massive slab of mahogany, polished to a mirror finish, and the floor was so spotless it reflected the overhead lights like glass. It was the kind of room where fortunes were divided, empires decided, and lives dismantled with a flick of a pen. For Amelia Hayes, the room felt less like a place of law and more like an execution chamber. The sterile air smelled faintly of leather and carpet cleaner, a scent that made her stomach turn. It was not just morning sickness, it was dread, a dread so thick it seemed to settle in her lungs. She sat at one end of the table, her chair slightly lower, her presence dwarfed by the towering windows and the vastness of the space. She looked small, almost fragile, in her simple navy dress and modest flats. Her hair was pulled back in a bun that had loosened from the rain, a few strands clinging stubbornly to her cheeks. She had tried to look composed, professional even, but the weight of exhaustion hung on her shoulders. Across from her, Adrian Cole sat with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him its admiration. He leaned casually back in his chair, legs crossed, one polished shoe swinging with careless arrogance. His cufflinks gleamed under the lights, tiny, deliberate symbols of wealth. The way he draped his arm around Chloe made the entire proceeding feel less like a legal process and more like theater, a performance staged to humiliate. Chloe basked in it. She sat close to Adrian, her posture perfect, her perfume drifting sweetly across the table like a taunt. She whispered something into his ear and laughed, a brittle sound that seemed to ricochet off the polished wood. Every detail about her screamed deliberate, her watch catching the light, her manicure flashing when she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her legs crossed in a way that made her stilettos glint like weapons. Amelia's lawyer, Sarah, sat beside her, shuffling papers and speaking in a calm, measured voice. But Amelia barely heard her. The words blurred together, drowned out by the pounding of her heart. All she could hear was the echo of Adrian's laughter, the scrape of Chloe's heels, the silent roar of humiliation. The agreement lay open in front of her, page after page spelling out the dismantling of her life. 10 years of marriage reduced to numbers, divided into neat little columns. Adrian would keep their penthouse, their investments, their savings. Amelia was left with 6 months on her apartment lease and a one-time payment of $10,000, barely enough to cover her medical bills, let alone prepare for the life growing inside her. Her eyes lingered on the numbers, her vision swimming. She swallowed hard, her hand instinctively brushing against her stomach under the table. They didn't know. Neither Adrian nor Chloe had any idea that she was pregnant. The secret sat inside her like a fragile flame, and she held her breath, terrified it might be extinguished. Adrian's lawyer, a slick man in a gray suit, cleared his throat. "If we can proceed, Miss Hayes, it would be best to finalize this quickly." Adrian smirked, leaning forward. "Yes, Amelia. Let's not waste everyone's time. You've always been practical. I'm sure you'll understand this is for the best." For the best, the words sliced through her. Best for him, perhaps. Best for Chloe, who twirled her diamond bracelet as if she had already won the spoils. But not for her. Not for the child inside her who would never know a father's love, only the memory of abandonment. The air grew heavier, pressing down on her chest. Amelia wanted to scream, to tell them everything, to reveal that while they sat there gloating, she carried the very legacy Adrian thought he had thrown away. But the words lodged in her throat. Fear silenced her. The timing wasn't right. She couldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing. Sarah leaned closer, her voice gentle. "Amelia, it's time." The pen slid toward her across the table. Its metallic barrel gleamed, cold and unforgiving. Amelia picked it up with trembling fingers. She looked down at the empty line waiting for her signature, the line that would sever her from the man she once loved, the life she once believed in. Adrian leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her. Chloe's hand stroked his sleeve, her smile smug. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in, the weight of their stares suffocating. Amelia's heart pounded in her ears. She thought of the nights she had lain awake, begging for a miracle. She thought of the test she held just weeks ago, the tears that had fallen when she saw those 2 pink lines. She thought of the tiny life inside her, a life Adrian would never know. A life she would protect with everything she had left. Her hand shook as she lowered the pen to the page. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the scratch of ink against paper. With every letter she wrote, it felt like a piece of her was being carved away. When she finished, she dropped the pen. It clattered softly against the table, a sound that seemed louder than thunder. "Done," Adrian announced, rising from his seat. He didn't even look at her. He pressed a kiss onto Chloe's temple, his arm tightening around her. "Let's go celebrate, darling. Tonight's the start of our new life." Chloe laughed, a sound like broken glass. They turned and walked out together, leaving Amelia in the vast emptiness of the room. The silence was deafening. Amelia sat frozen, staring at the papers, her hand pressed against her abdomen. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Tears slipped down her cheeks unchecked. Outside, the storm raged. Lightning illuminated the windows, thunder shaking the floor. The city beyond seemed cold, unwelcoming, indifferent. Amelia closed her eyes, her fingers curling protectively around her stomach. She whispered to the life within her, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, but I promise I'll find a way." She pushed herself slowly to her feet, her legs unsteady. The room tilted, the weight of grief and exhaustion pressing down on her like an anchor. She gathered her coat, her bag, her shattered pride, and turned toward the door. The hallway outside was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. Her footsteps echoed, lonely and hollow, down the corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. And just as she reached the exit, her phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, her heart skipping a beat. With trembling hands, she answered. "Miss Hayes," a firm voice said, "this is Sullivan and Cromwell. We need you to come immediately. It's urgent. It concerns an inheritance." Amelia stopped dead in her tracks, her breath caught in her throat. And in that moment, she realized her life was not over. It was about to be rewritten. Adrian Cole had always known how to command a room. Even before he had money, before he had status, he carried himself with the arrogance of someone certain the world would bend to his will. To outsiders, that confidence looked like charm. To Amelia, who had lived with him for nearly a decade, it had slowly morphed into something darker. Entitlement. She used to love that about him. His determination, his unshakable belief that he was destined for greatness. It had felt intoxicating, like being tethered to a rocket headed for the stars. But rockets burn out. They leave behind destruction in their wake. Now, sitting across from him during the divorce, Amelia saw not the man she had once married, but the mask he had become. Adrian wore success like armor. His bespoke suit, his manicured nails, the faint scent of cologne that cost more than her monthly rent, everything about him screamed that he was untouchable. And Chloe only amplified it. The young woman sat glued to his side, her every movement calculated to remind Amelia of what she had lost. The way Chloe leaned into Adrian's chest, the way she let her laughter echo just a little too loudly, the way she adjusted her watch to catch the light. It wasn't enough for Chloe to have Adrian. She needed Amelia to know she had won. When Sarah, Amelia's lawyer, excused herself briefly to make a phone call, Adrian seized the chance to lean forward. His smile was practiced, polished, as though he were addressing a boardroom rather than his pregnant ex-wife. "You know, Amelia," he said smoothly, "you'll be better off this way. No more worrying about late nights, no more carrying responsibilities you were never built for. You can focus on, well, whatever it is you do these days." Her stomach twisted. Whatever it is you do, as though years of running their household, hosting his partners, supporting his career, meant nothing. Chloe placed her manicured hand on his arm, her voice syrupy sweet but sharp enough to cut. "Adrian, don't be too harsh. She's adjusting. Some women just aren't cut out for the kind of life you live. It takes a certain strength." She smirked, her eyes flicking to Amelia's plain dress, her worn-out shoes. "Not everyone can keep up." Amelia's breath caught, but she stayed silent. She had learned long ago that speaking only gave them more ammunition. Adrian chuckled, nodding as if Chloe had said something profound. "You're right, darling. Not everyone can keep up." It was a performance. Every word, every gesture, a carefully orchestrated show meant to establish dominance. And Amelia was the unwilling audience, trapped in the theater of their cruelty. She wanted to scream that she was carrying his child, that while he paraded Chloe as the future, his real legacy was growing inside her. But fear held her tongue. Not fear of him, but fear of giving them the power to twist it into another weapon against her. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, his tone softening in mock concern. "Listen, Amelia, don't think of this as a loss. Think of it as freedom. You can go back to your books, your quiet life. You were always more comfortable in the shadows. And Chloe," he glanced at the younger woman, his smile smug, "she thrives in the light." Chloe leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered something that made him laugh. She turned her gaze back to Amelia, her eyes glinting with triumph. "We're planning a trip to Santorini after this. It'll be nice to celebrate properly. You understand, don't you?" Amelia's throat tightened. She remembered when Santorini had been their dream. She had pinned pictures of whitewashed villas and sapphire seas to their kitchen corkboard. They had promised to go for their 5th anniversary. Instead, he was taking Chloe. Every smile, every kiss Adrian pressed onto Chloe's temple, every mocking glance, it was all designed to break her. And for a moment, it nearly did. Sarah returned, sliding back into her chair, her expression professional but sympathetic. She whispered quietly to Amelia, "Don't let them see you crumble." But Adrian wasn't finished. He leaned forward again, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. Look, Amelia, you'll always have your books. That's who you are. Quiet, steady, small. Chloe and I, we're made for more. We're made for the world stage. Amelia clenched her fists under the table. Small. That's what he saw when he looked at her now. Not the woman who had stood by him when his bank account barely scraped 4 digits. Not the woman who had dried his tears when his first business failed. Not the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. Just small. Disposable. Chloe sighed dramatically, as though bored of the entire spectacle. Adrian, darling, can we wrap this up? I have a fitting this afternoon. The new Dior collection waits for no one. Adrian smirked. Of course, love. Amelia, just sign. Let's make this official so we can all move on. His tone carried finality, as though the conversation and her life were already decided. Amelia felt her chest constrict. She was drowning in the weight of humiliation, in the cruel reality of what her marriage had become. Yet beneath it all, a quiet fire burned. Her hand instinctively touched her stomach, hidden beneath the table. They didn't know. They had no idea. Sarah handed her the pen once more. The world felt silent, watching, waiting. Amelia's eyes blurred as she stared at the page, and across from her, Adrian whispered one last dagger. You'll thank me one day, Amelia. This is Mercy. Chloe giggled, her voice like shattered glass. Yes, Mercy. Amelia's breath caught, her chest tight, her entire being trembling on the edge of collapse. And in that moment, with their cruelty pressing down on her, Amelia realized that the people across from her were not just her past. They were the storm she would one day have to destroy. The pen felt heavier than iron in Amelia's hand. Every eye in the room seemed to fix on her, as though she were not a woman, but a spectacle. The main act in a cruel theater staged for Adrian and Chloe's amusement. Her lawyer Sarah murmured something encouraging at her side, but Amelia barely heard. The world had dulled to a blur. The smell of Chloe's perfume, the rhythmic tapping of Adrian's fingers on the mahogany table, the faint hum of the air conditioner, all of it fused into a suffocating haze. Adrian leaned back in his chair, smirking. Come on, Amelia, don't drag this out. You've always been practical. Just sign. It's the smartest thing you'll ever do. Chloe laughed softly, tilting her head to rest on Adrian's shoulder. Yes, darling, let her be free. After all, we don't want her clinging to something that's long gone. She adjusted her diamond bracelet so it caught the light, her gaze landing squarely on Amelia's trembling hands. Amelia swallowed hard. Her throat was dry, raw from holding back tears. She wanted to scream, to slam the pen down and shout the truth, that she was pregnant, that she carried Adrian's child, that while they mocked her as a relic, his real legacy beat within her. But she couldn't. Not here. Not now. Her chest tightened. Beneath the table, her free hand pressed against her stomach, a protective gesture only she understood. The life inside her was too new, too fragile, to be revealed in the middle of this battlefield. For now, it was her secret, her silent strength. The paper before her blurred as her eyes filled. Every line, every legal term was a dagger. Waives all rights to future earnings, forfeits claim to property. Accepts one-time payment of $10,000. $10,000. The cost of Chloe's handbag. The cost of her dignity, her sacrifices, her years of loyalty. Her vision swam, but she forced her hand to move. The pen scratched against the paper, carving her name into a contract that dismantled her life. Each letter of her signature felt like a betrayal, to herself, to her marriage, to the child inside her. Adrian watched her sign, his lips curling in satisfaction. He leaned forward, speaking low but loud enough for her to hear. There? That wasn't so hard, was it? Chloe giggled, resting her manicured hand on his chest. She looked so relieved. Don't you think, Adrian? Relieved. The word echoed in Amelia's mind like mockery. She was not relieved. She was broken, gutted, torn apart. Yet she forced herself to keep her chin lifted, to blink back the tears threatening to spill. She would not let them see her collapse, not fully. When she dropped the pen, it clattered against the table, echoing through the silent room like the toll of a funeral bell. Sarah immediately reached for the papers, her voice steady. That concludes today's proceedings. Adrian stood, tugging Chloe up with him. His hand brushed hers, possessive and triumphant, as though parading her was part of the deal. He pressed a kiss against her cheek, smirking at Amelia as he did. Let's go, darling. We've got reservations. Tonight we celebrate our future. Chloe laughed, high and sharp. She leaned into him, whispering something in his ear before both of them strode out, leaving the echo of their laughter hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, and Amelia was alone. Her composure crumbled. Her shoulders sagged, and her face fell into her hands as the sobs she had suppressed all afternoon tore free. The sound was raw, aching, a mixture of grief and rage and helplessness. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her arm. "I'm so sorry, Amelia." Amelia shook her head, wiping at her tears quickly. She couldn't bear sympathy. Not now. She needed air. She pushed herself to her feet, gathering her bag, her coat, her shattered pride. Her legs trembled as she walked out of the conference room, her heels clicking against the polished floor like the echo of finality. The hallway felt endless, lined with framed degrees and glossy photographs of smiling attorneys shaking hands with powerful clients. Amelia's reflection followed her in the glass, pale, hollow-eyed, a ghost of the woman she had once been. By the time she pushed through the glass doors of the building, the storm outside had unleashed its fury. Sheets of rain pounded the pavement, soaking her instantly as she stepped in the downpour. She didn't open her umbrella. She didn't care. The city bustled around her, indifferent to her unraveling. Cars splashed through puddles, horns blared, neon lights flickered in shop windows. But for Amelia, the world had narrowed to a blur of rain and tears. Her hand went again to her stomach, clutching it as though she could shield the tiny heartbeat inside from the cruelty of the world. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the life within her. "I'm so sorry." People passed by without a second glance. A businessman rushing to hail a cab, a couple laughing under a shared umbrella, a mother tugging her child along. To them, Amelia was just another woman in the rain. They didn't know that she had just lost everything. Her steps slowed. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on her, heavier than the soaked coat clinging to her body. She stopped at the edge of the street, gripping a lamppost for balance, her vision swimming. For a moment, she thought she might collapse right there on the slick sidewalk. And then her phone buzzed. The vibration cut through the storm, sharp and insistent. Amelia fumbled for it with trembling hands, nearly dropping the device as she pulled it from her purse. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. Her breath caught. She almost ignored it. Another bill collector, perhaps, another reminder of how little she had left. But something in her gut urged her to answer. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello?" A voice, firm and authoritative, responded immediately. "Miss Hayes, this is Sullivan and Cromwell. We need you to come to our office at once. It's urgent. It concerns an inheritance." Amelia froze, raindrops streaming down her face. "Inheritance?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "Yes, please come immediately. It cannot wait." Her heart pounded. She looked around at the rain-slick streets, the blur of strangers passing her by, the neon lights reflecting in puddles. Nothing in her world made sense anymore. She had signed away her marriage, lost her dignity, walked out of that conference room believing she had nothing left. And now, a stranger was telling her that something unimaginable, was waiting for her. Her hand went again to her stomach, her tears mixing with the rain. And as she stood trembling in the storm, Amelia realized that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The storm did not let up. Rain lashed against Amelia as if the heavens themselves were determined to wash her from the earth. She stumbled down the slick sidewalk, her coat plastered to her skin, her shoes ruined, her hair a tangled mess. People hurried past, some glancing at her, but quickly looking away. To them, she was just another drenched figure in the chaos of the city. To Amelia, she was nothing more than a shadow. Someone erased, discarded, forgotten. Her phone still buzzed faintly in her pocket from the missed call. Sullivan and Cromwell. An inheritance. It sounded absurd, almost laughable. Her life had just been dismantled before her very eyes. What inheritance could possibly change that? But exhaustion drowned out even the flicker of curiosity. All she could think about was the ache in her chest, the crushing weight of loss, the cruel echo of Adrian's laughter ringing in her ears. She ducked into the awning of a closed cafe, collapsing onto the cold step. Her hands trembled as she buried her face in them, sobs breaking free. The sound was ragged, unrestrained, the sound of a woman who had hit rock bottom. Memories swirled. Adrian's vows on their wedding day, whispered promises of forever, The nights she had held him when his ambitions faltered, the first time they had talked about children, both of them dreaming of the family they would one day build. And then the years of disappointment, the cruel emptiness of infertility. How cruel, Amelia thought bitterly, that now, when he had abandoned her, when he had chosen another, she was finally carrying his child. The miracle she had begged for had arrived too late to save them. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, clutching it protectively. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the life inside her. "I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know if I can." Her tears blurred the neon lights across the street, turning them into streaks of color against the storm. The city roared around her, indifferent to her pain. She thought of the future and felt nothing but dread. How could she raise a child on her meager archivist's salary? How could she pay for rent, for food, for doctor's visits? $10,000, the pitiful settlement Adrian had offered, would vanish in months. What then? Would she end up homeless, clutching her baby in some shelter, while Adrian and Chloe sipped champagne in Santorini? The thought gutted her. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking slightly, desperate for comfort that wouldn't come. She heard her mother's voice in her memory. "You're stronger than you think, Amelia." But was she? At this moment, she felt anything but strong. She felt small, broken, like a leaf tossed by the storm. The wind howled, rattling the cafe sign above her head. Thunder cracked, so loud it made her flinch. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to her knees. For a terrifying moment, she wished she could just disappear. If she closed her eyes long enough, maybe the pain would fade. Maybe she wouldn't have to face the endless tomorrows filled with judgmental stares and whispered pity. A couple walked by under a shared umbrella. Amelia lifted her head just long enough to see them laughing, leaning into each other, their love a shield against the rain. The sight was like a knife twisting in her chest. That used to be her, walking with Adrian, laughing at nothing, believing they could weather any storm. Now she was alone. Alone, except for the tiny, fragile heartbeat inside her. Her sobs quieted into hiccups, her body trembling from cold. She dug through her purse for tissues, but her fingers brushed instead against the folded sonogram tucked carefully in her wallet. She pulled it out, her breath catching. The image was blurry, almost indistinguishable, but she could see it. Tiny, miraculous, proof of life, proof that she was not entirely broken. She traced the outline with her finger, tears spilling anew. "I have you," she whispered, "and that has to be enough." But deep down she wasn't sure it was. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the storm losing its fury. Amelia forced herself to her feet, tucking the sonogram back into her wallet. She began to walk again, each step heavy, her mind numb. She wandered without direction, her body moving on autopilot through streets she barely registered. Eventually, she found herself back at her apartment. The building loomed gray and unwelcoming, its cracked bricks and flickering lights a stark contrast to the luxury Adrian and Chloe flaunted. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort, and unlocked her door. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender from the candle she had left burning earlier. It was small, sparsely furnished, but it was hers, or at least it had been until the lease ran out in 6 months. She kicked off her soaked shoes, peeled away her wet coat, and collapsed onto the couch. Silence pressed in. No laughter, no footsteps, no voice calling her name. Just silence. She curled into a ball, clutching her stomach, and let the tears fall freely once more. Hours slipped by unnoticed, the room growing darker as night fell. She didn't turn on the lights, she didn't move, she simply lay there, drowning in grief. At some point, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Probably another bill, another reminder of everything she couldn't handle. She turned her face into the cushion, wishing the world would leave her alone. But the phone buzzed again, and again. Persistent. With a groan, she reached for it, her vision blurry as she read the notification. Voicemail from Sullivan and Cromwell. Her heart stuttered. She sat up slowly, pressing the phone to her ear. The voice from earlier filled the room, steady and calm. "Miss Hayes, this is Sullivan and Cromwell. Please, it is imperative that you come in tomorrow morning. This concerns an urgent inheritance matter. It cannot be delayed." The message ended, leaving silence once more. Amelia sat frozen, the phone clutched in her hand. Inheritance. The word echoed in her mind, impossible to believe. She had no rich relatives. No one in her family had ever had money, let alone enough to warrant the involvement of one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. It didn't make sense, and yet something about the man's voice had carried weight, urgency, authority. This wasn't a prank, this wasn't a mistake. Her chest tightened, not with grief this time, but with something foreign, something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She looked down at her stomach, her hand resting gently over it. Maybe this is the answer, she whispered. Her reflection in the darkened window caught her eye. She looked pale, broken, fragile. But behind her tear-streaked face, her eyes glimmered with the faintest spark. And as she clutched her stomach in the silence of her apartment, Amelia realized that tomorrow might not be another day of loss. It might be the day her life changes forever. The next morning, Amelia Hayes stood before the towering glass facade of Sullivan and Cromwell. The building loomed over the city like a monument to power, its marble columns and gleaming windows catching the morning light. She had passed this skyscraper countless times on her way to work, always staring up in awe. To her, it was a place for the elite, corporations, billionaires, dynasties. Never, not in her wildest dreams, had she imagined walking through its doors for herself. Her heart pounded as she entered the lobby. The floors were polished marble, the ceilings high and adorned with chandeliers that seemed to belong in a palace. Men and women in sharp suits strode purposefully past her, clutching briefcases, their expressions hard and focused. Amelia felt out of place in her plain black dress and modest heels, her hair pulled back simply. She looked like what she was, a discarded wife with nothing left. Except something had brought her here. She clutched her bag tightly, reminding herself of the voicemail. The man's voice had been clear, insistent, urgent inheritance matter. The words repeated in her mind like a mantra, carrying her forward when her legs threatened to give out. At the front desk, a receptionist greeted her with a professional smile. "Miss Hayes, right this way." Her stomach tightened. They had been expecting her. She followed a young assistant down a corridor lined with framed photos of famous cases, past frosted glass doors bearing the names of partners. Finally, they reached a corner office that seemed to belong more to a head of state than a lawyer. Inside, a man in his 60s rose from behind a vast mahogany desk. His silver hair was combed back neatly, his suit impeccable. His presence was commanding, yet his eyes softened when they met hers. "Miss Hayes," he said warmly, extending a hand. "I'm Charles Sullivan." Amelia shook his hand, her own clammy and trembling. I don't understand why I'm here." He gestured for her to sit. "I imagine this is overwhelming, but I assure you, you are here for a reason. A very important one." She lowered herself into the leather chair, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "There must be some mistake. I don't have family with money. I don't even know anyone who—" Mr. Sullivan raised a hand gently. "It's no mistake, Miss Hayes. You are the sole heir named in the will of Jonathan Everett." Amelia blinked. The name meant nothing to her. I don't know who that is." "A distant relative on your mother's side," Sullivan explained. "He was a private man, a very wealthy one. He built Everett Global, a multinational conglomerate in shipping, real estate, and energy. He passed away 2 weeks ago, and according to his will, everything, his estate, his assets, his controlling shares, passes to you." The words slammed into her like thunder. Amelia shook her head violently, disbelief clouding her mind. "That's impossible. I'm no one. Why would he leave anything to me?" Sullivan's eyes softened. "Because, Miss Hayes, he believed you deserved it. I can only share what the will states. To Amelia Hayes, I leave my fortune, because she represents the quiet strength that this family has long forgotten." Her breath caught. Quiet strength. The phrase lingered, echoing in her chest. Sullivan continued, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "You now control Everett Global. Your net worth is estimated in the billions. This will change your life, Miss Hayes. Permanently." Billions. The word felt foreign, surreal. Amelia stared at the folder as though it might vanish if she blinked too hard. She thought of her tiny apartment, the pitiful $10,000 Adrian had thrown her way. The nights she had spent calculating how to afford diapers and formula. And now this man was telling her she was wealthier than the very people who had humiliated her. Her hand trembled as she reached for the folder. She opened it, scanning numbers so large they made her dizzy. Properties around the world. bank accounts with more zeros than she could count, entire corporations under her control. Her vision blurred with tears. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Sullivan replied gently. "All you have to do is sign the acceptance documents. Once you do, the company and the estate are officially yours." Her mind spun. She thought of Adrian and Chloe, walking out of that conference room like victors. She thought of Adrian's smug voice, declaring she was small, irrelevant, destined to live in the shadows. She thought of Chloe's cruel laughter, her dismissive smirk, and she thought of the child growing inside her. The miracle Adrian would never know. A future she had once feared she couldn't provide, now suddenly secure beyond measure. For the first time in months, Amelia felt something ignite inside her. Not despair, not grief. Power. Her hand steadied as she took the pen Sullivan offered. The moment was surreal, almost dreamlike, as she pressed the nib to the page and began to sign. Each stroke of her signature felt like rebirth. When she finished, Sullivan nodded with satisfaction. "Congratulations, Miss Hayes. You are now the head of Everett Global." The words hung in the air, shimmering like sunlight breaking through clouds. Amelia exhaled, her body trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering silently to the life within her. "You'll never want for anything, not ever." Outside the office window, the city sprawled beneath her like a kingdom she had unknowingly inherited. And somewhere in that same city, Adrian and Chloe were sipping champagne, completely unaware that the woman they had discarded had just become the most powerful person they would ever know. And as Amelia walked out of Sullivan's office, documents in hand, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next time Adrian saw her, he would no longer recognize the woman he had left behind. The days that followed felt like living inside a dream. Amelia Hayes, who had walked out of a sterile conference room broken and humiliated, now woke each morning to find her name on the cover of legal documents worth billions. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from bankers, executives, advisors, all addressing her as Miss Hayes, chairwoman of Everett Global. At first, she struggled to process it. She was still the woman who made tea in chipped mugs, who lived in a modest apartment, who cried herself to sleep on a sagging couch. Yet the world had shifted around her. People who once ignored her now stood when she entered the room. Doors that had always been locked were thrown wide open. Charles Sullivan guided her carefully, explaining each step with patience. "This isn't just money, Amelia. This is power. You have resources most people can't even imagine. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" What did she want? For so long, her life had been about survival, about holding together a marriage that crumbled in her hands. But now with this fortune, with this company, with this miracle childer, she realized she didn't just want to survive. She wanted to rise. The transformation began quietly. Amelia stood in front of her mirror one morning, staring at the tired woman who looked back at her. Pale skin, hollow eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She barely recognized herself. Slowly, she reached for a brush, smoothing her hair until it gleamed. She applied makeup with careful hands, soft foundation, a touch of blush, a bold red lipstick she had once thought too daring. When she slipped into the tailored navy dress Sullivan's assistant had chosen for her, the woman in the mirror looked different, stronger, sharper. Not the broken wife Adrian had discarded. Someone new. Someone reborn. Her makeover extended beyond appearances. She began studying Everett Global, poring over reports late into the night. She asked questions, challenged assumptions, and, to the surprise of the board, demonstrated a sharp, intuitive mind. She wasn't a figurehead. She wasn't a puppet. She was ready to lead. Still, the memory of Adrian and Chloe haunted her. Their smug laughter, their cruel words, the way they had walked out of that room as if they had won. For days, those images had burned in her mind like scars. But now, they fueled her. Every step she took, every decision she made, was one step closer to the day she would face them again. And she knew exactly where it would happen. The annual Everett Global Gala, a glittering event attended by the city's most powerful. Adrian and Chloe, desperate social climbers, would certainly be there. They thrived on attention, on rubbing shoulders with the elite. But this year, the spotlight wouldn't belong to them. It would belong to Amelia. Preparation became a ritual. She hired a stylist, a woman named Lena, who had dressed senators and CEOs. Together they crafted a look that was both elegant and commanding. A black velvet gown that hugged her figure, its neckline sharp and regal. Diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement. Her hair swept into waves that framed her face with timeless glamour. When Amelia stood in front of the mirror on the night of the gala, she barely breathed. She looked like power. She looked like vengeance. She looked like a woman no one could ignore. "You look like you could end a man's career with one glance," Lena said with a grin. Amelia's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Maybe I intend to." But transformation was more than clothes. It was in her posture, the way she carried herself, the steel in her voice when she practiced her speech. She no longer spoke softly, apologetically. She spoke with authority, with conviction. The child inside her gave her strength too. Each flutter in her belly reminded her that she was not just rising for herself. She was rising for the future she carried, for the life Adrian had deemed impossible. On the evening of the gala, as her car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Waldorf Astoria, Amelia felt the weight of the moment. Photographers lined the red carpet, their cameras flashing as socialites and moguls stepped out of limousines. She could hear the buzz of voices, the hum of expectation. The driver opened her door. Amelia stepped out, the velvet gown trailing elegantly behind her, her heels clicking against the marble. For a heartbeat, the crowd fell silent. Then the cameras erupted, flashes exploding like fireworks. "Amelia Hayes!" someone shouted. "The new heiress of Everett Global." She walked forward slowly, gracefully, her chin lifted, her eyes calm. Inside her heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. Every step was deliberate, a statement to the world. "I am not broken. I am not forgotten. I am here." Inside the ballroom, chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting golden light across a sea of tuxedos and gowns. Waiters glided through with champagne flutes, and an orchestra played softly in the background. The air was thick with power and privilege. And somewhere in that glittering crowd, Amelia spotted them. Adrian and Chloe. He looked the same, impeccable suit, arrogant posture, but his smile faltered when his eyes landed on her. Chloe, radiant in a silver gown, froze mid-laugh, her hand tightening on Adrian's arm. The room seemed to shift, the spotlight tilting. For the first time, Adrian and Chloe weren't the center of attention. Amelia was. She glided past them, her presence magnetic, her aura undeniable. People turned, whispers rippled, cameras followed. She felt their eyes on her, their disbelief, their jealousy. Amelia didn't stop. She walked straight to the center of the room, where Sullivan waited with a microphone. He smiled, handing it to her. "This evening," he announced, "we welcome Amelia Hayes, the new head of Everett Global." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Adrian's face paled. Chloe's lips parted in shock. Amelia lifted the microphone, her hands steady. She scanned the room, her eyes finally settling on Adrian. And as her lips curved into a calm, knowing smile, the world held its breath, waiting to hear the words of the woman they had once dismissed as nothing. The ballroom held its breath as Amelia Hayes stood at the center, microphone in hand. Crystals from the chandeliers glittered above, reflecting 1,000 fractured lights onto the sea of powerful faces staring back at her. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, capturing the poised silhouette of the woman who only weeks earlier had been dismissed as a relic. Adrian Cole's smirk had vanished, replaced with the tight-lipped expression of a man caught off guard. Chloe clung to his arm, her silver gown shimmering under the lights, but her eyes flickered nervously. She wasn't laughing now. Amelia inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "Good evening. Some of you may know me. Many of you may not. My name is Amelia Hayes, and as of this week, I am the chairwoman of Everett Global." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Executives leaned toward each other, whispering. Reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks. The orchestra fell silent. Amelia continued, her tone calm but firm, each word slicing through the air. "For years I lived quietly. I worked behind the scenes, believing that love and loyalty were enough to build a life. I gave my heart, my time, my devotion, and in return I was discarded. Publicly, cruelly, replaced like an old coat." She paused, letting the words sink in. The audience was rapt. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. "But life," Amelia said, her lips curving into a faint smile, "has a way of correcting injustices." Gasps rippled through the room. She let her gaze sweep across the sea of faces before landing squarely on Adrian. Her eyes locked onto his, unflinching. The man who once told me I belonged in the shadows will now have to watch as I stand in the light. Murmurs spread like wildfire. All eyes darted to Adrian, who flushed under the scrutiny. Chloe whispered something in his ear, but he shook her off, his composure cracking. Amelia's voice grew steadier, stronger. Some of you witnessed it. The humiliation, the cruelty. A husband parading another woman in front of his wife while asking for her signature on the very papers that erased her from his life. Some of you even applauded it. But tonight, I stand here not as a victim, but as proof that betrayal is not the end of the story. The crowd erupted into applause, the sound crashing like a wave. Cameras flashed, capturing Amelia's defiant stance. Chloe's face twisted, her composure slipping. She hissed at Adrian, "Do something!" But Adrian sat frozen, beads of sweat forming at his temple. For the first time he had no words. Amelia turned slightly, her voice carrying through the ballroom. Adrian Cole once told me I was small, that I belonged with my books, my quiet little life. Tonight I tell you this, there is nothing small about surviving betrayal. There is nothing small about rising from ashes, and there is nothing small about carrying a miracle that no one thought possible. A collective gasp swept the room. Whispers surged. A miracle? Carrying? Care? People exchanged wide-eyed glances. Adrian's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Amelia," he began, but his voice cracked. Amelia raised her hand, silencing him. "Yes, Adrian. While you paraded Chloe through restaurants and courtrooms, while you stripped me of everything I owned, I carried the very legacy you thought you'd destroyed. I am pregnant with your child." The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, flashes from cameras so bright they blinded. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised, questions flying. Adrian's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Chloe's hand slipped from his arm as she staggered back, horror etched across her features. Amelia stood tall, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "And unlike the cruelty I endured, this child will know love. This child will know strength. This child will never be discarded." The applause was thunderous, echoing against the gilded walls of the ballroom. Amelia's words cut through the chaos like fire, searing into every witness. Adrian rose abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. This is outrageous," he shouted, his voice trembling. "She's lying. This is manipulation." But the crowd wasn't convinced. Too many had seen his arrogance, his public cruelty. Too many had witnessed Amelia's quiet endurance. Now, seeing her reborn in power, her words rang with undeniable truth. Chloe grabbed his arm desperately. "Adrian, stop." But it was too late. A reporter shouted from the crowd, "Mr. Cole, care to comment on abandoning your pregnant wife for another woman?" Cameras surged toward him. Microphones shoved into his face. The questions grew sharper, harsher. "Did you know she was expecting? How do you respond to allegations of cruelty? What does this mean for your reputation?" Adrian stumbled, his mask of confidence shattering. He tugged Chloe toward the exit, his once proud posture reduced to a frantic scramble. The crowd followed, their questions biting like teeth. Chloe's face twisted in fury, her whisper loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You told me she was nothing." Adrian snapped back. "Shut up." The spectacle was complete. The once smug couple fled under the flashing lights, their humiliation laid bare for the entire elite of the city to witness. Amelia watched them go, her expression calm, almost serene. The crowd turned back to her, their applause rising again. She nodded graciously, her hand resting on her stomach. In that moment, she wasn't just a woman wronged. She was a symbol, a testament to resilience, to justice, to the quiet strength that could no longer be ignored. And as the orchestra struck up again, the gala transformed into a celebration not of wealth or power, but of survival and rebirth. But Amelia knew the story wasn't finished. This was only the beginning. Because while Adrian and Chloe fled into the night, their downfall had only just begun, and the cruelest twist of fate still waited for them. The fallout from the gala was immediate and merciless. By the next morning, headlines screamed across every newspaper and digital feed. Discarded wife revealed as heiress. Ex-husband humiliated at gala. Adrian Cole exposed. Abandoned pregnant wife for socialite mistress. Power shift. Amelia Hayes takes control of Everett Global. The photos were damning. Adrian's pale, panicked face as microphones shoved toward him. Chloe's twisted grimace as she hissed at him under the glare of flashing lights. And Amelia, serene, poised, radiant in black velvet, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Within days, Adrian's world began to crumble. His clients, wary of the scandal, pulled their contracts. His business partners, disgusted by his treatment of Amelia, cut ties. The financial empire he had tried so desperately to build collapsed like a house of cards. Worse still, the personal blow came swiftly. Only weeks after the gala, Adrian and Chloe sat in a sterile white doctor's office. Chloe clutched Adrian's hand, her usual bravado gone, her face pale as the physician delivered the news with clinical detachment. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett. You will not be able to have children. Your condition is irreversible." The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating. Chloe's nails dug into Adrian's skin. Her wide eyes brimmed with disbelief. No, that's not possible. Run another test. There has to be a mistake." But there was no mistake. The truth was final. Chloe fled the office in tears, her sobs echoing down the corridor. Adrian sat frozen, the doctor's words echoing in his ears. The irony was cruel, almost biblical. The man who had abandoned a wife he thought barren for a younger, brighter future had bound himself to a woman who could never give him the legacy he craved. Meanwhile, Amelia's life blossomed. At Everett Global, she proved herself not only capable, but visionary. She sat at the head of the boardroom table, the same kind of polished mahogany surface where she had once been humiliated and commanded respect. Executives who had once doubted her found themselves awed by her clarity, her quiet determination. She didn't just inherit wealth, she wielded it with grace. But it wasn't only power that defined her new life. It was peace. She decorated a nursery in her apartment, painting the walls a soft shade of yellow, setting up a crib near the window where sunlight streamed in. Every night she stood by that crib, her hand on her stomach, whispering promises to her unborn child. "You will never feel unwanted. You will never be told you are small. You will grow up knowing that your mother fought for you and that you were worth every battle." She no longer cried herself to sleep. She no longer doubted her worth. The betrayal that once haunted her had transformed into fuel, into strength, into purpose. And though Adrian tried to call, tried to beg, tried to twist the narrative back in his favor, Amelia never answered. She didn't need to. His downfall was complete, and hers was the sweetest victory: silence. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. Amelia was leaving her office one evening when she saw him waiting by the curb. Adrian looked nothing like the man she remembered. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow with sleepless nights. He stepped forward, desperation etched across his face. "Amelia, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake. I didn't know about the baby, about everything. I was wrong. I see that now. Please just give me another chance." For a moment, Amelia simply looked at him. Once his voice would have undone her. Once his apologies would have cracked her open. But now she felt nothing but calm. She shook her head slowly. "You didn't just make a mistake, Adrian. You made a choice. And now you have to live with it." His eyes filled with tears. "Chloe, she can't have children. I thought—" His voice trailed off, shame coating every word. Amelia's gaze softened, not with pity, but with finality. "That's not my burden to carry. Not anymore." She turned and stepped into her waiting car, leaving him standing alone on the sidewalk, the weight of his choices crushing him. That night, Amelia lay in bed, her hand resting on her stomach, feeling the gentle flutter of movement inside her. Tears filled her eyes, not of grief but of joy. The kind of tears that cleanse, that heal. She whispered into the darkness, her voice steady, filled with love. "We made it. We survived. And from here on, we thrive." Months later, Amelia stood in the hospital room, cradling her newborn in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, eyes blinking up at her as though recognizing the woman who had fought so hard to bring them into the world. In that moment, every scar, every wound, every betrayal felt worth it. She had lost everything and gained more than she could ever imagine. Her journey was no longer about Adrian or Chloe or revenge. It was about love. It was about strength. It was about proving to herself and to the world that women are never weak when they stand for their own dignity. Outside the hospital window, the city pulsed with life. But inside, Amelia rocked her child gently, her heart overflowing. And as she whispered a final promise to the baby in her arms, Amelia knew with absolute certainty this was the ending Adrian thought she'd never have, and the beginning of a life more powerful, more beautiful than she had ever dreamed.